Give me your beach house as a wedding gift, or I'll lie and say you tried to seduce me," my new son-in-law whispered during the wedding reception. I laughed and said, "Oh, darling, before you do that, why don't you introduce everyone to my special guest?" When he saw who I had brought, the wedding was called off. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got to that delicious moment of comeuppance. Because, honey, the best revenge is always served with a side of irony and a generous helping of, "I saw this coming from miles away." My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and at 52, I thought I'd seen every type of man trying to get his hands on my money. After my husband David died 3 years ago, leaving me with a considerable fortune from his tech company, I became quite the expert at spotting gold diggers. They usually came with obvious tells: too much cologne, eager compliments about my youthful appearance, and an uncanny interest in my financial portfolio during casual conversation. Blake Harrison wasn't like that. Blake was smooth as aged whiskey and twice as intoxicating. When my daughter Sophia brought him home 6 months ago, her eyes shining with that dangerous combination of love and naivety, I felt my maternal instincts kick into high alert. But Blake was clever, too clever. He never asked about money, never complimented my house or my jewelry. Instead, he focused entirely on Sophia, treating her like she was the only woman in the world. He brought me thoughtful gifts, a book by an author I'd mentioned liking, flowers for my garden, homemade cookies from a recipe his grandmother had taught him. When I tried to pay for dinner, he'd politely insist on covering it himself, explaining that his consulting business was doing well and he believed in taking care of family. It was almost perfect. Too perfect. The proposal came 3 months later, right here in my garden during Sophia's birthday party. Blake had asked my permission beforehand, such a gentleman, and had presented a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious. Sophia cried happy tears, our friends applauded, and I found myself clapping along while my brain screamed that something was wrong. But watching Sophia's face that day, seeing her pure joy, I decided to give Blake the benefit of the doubt. Maybe my cynicism was getting the better of me. Maybe I was so used to protecting my fortune that I couldn't recognize genuine love when it was right in front of me. The wedding planning began immediately. Sophia wanted everything perfect, and Blake supported her every extravagant idea. When she worried about the cost, he'd kiss her forehead and say, "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll figure it out. Your mother understands how important this day is." And like the loving mother I am, I wrote check after check. Catering for 200 guests, designer dress, luxury venue, string quartet, open bar, professional photographer. The bills added up to nearly $70,000. But watching Sophia's excitement made it worth every penny. Or so I thought, until tonight, when Blake cornered me near the champagne fountain at my daughter's wedding reception, adjusted his perfect tie, and showed me exactly who he really was. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to talk privately." I followed him to a quiet corner near the terrace doors, thinking he wanted to thank me for the wedding or perhaps discuss honeymoon plans. Instead, he moved closer than appropriate and spoke in a tone that made my blood run cold. "I know about your beach house in the Hamptons, the one worth $2.8 million. I want you to sign it over to Sophia as a wedding gift." I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry, what?" His smile never wavered, but his eyes turned predatory. "The beach house. Transfer the deed. Tonight if possible, but certainly by Monday. Blake, that house has been in my family for generations. I can't just—" "You can, and you will," he interrupted smoothly. "Because if you don't, I'll tell everyone that you tried to seduce me. Poor grieving widow, so lonely she made inappropriate advances toward her own daughter's fiancé. Can you imagine how devastated Sophia would be? The audacity of it took my breath away. This was his plan all along. The charm, the thoughtful gifts, the perfect proposal. It was all leading to this moment. He thought he had me cornered, thought I was just another wealthy widow too scared of scandal to fight back. That's when I started laughing. Not the polite society laugh I'd perfected over decades of charity galas and country club dinners. This was genuine, delighted laughter that came from somewhere deep in my chest. Because Blake Harrison had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated Eleanor Whitmore. Blake's confident smirk faltered as my laughter continued. He'd clearly expected tears, protests, maybe even begging. What he hadn't expected was for me to find his little blackmail scheme absolutely hilarious. "Did I say something funny?" he asked, his voice tight with confusion. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, wiping tears from my eyes. "You have no idea how funny this is. But before we continue this fascinating conversation, I really think you should meet someone." I gestured toward the ballroom where guests were mingling, champagne glasses catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. "You see that woman over there? The one in the emerald dress?" Blake followed my gaze to where an elegant brunette stood chatting with some wedding guests. She was stunning in that effortless way some women possess, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. "Who is she?" Blake demanded. Blake. But something in his voice had changed. The confidence was cracking. "That's Vera Martinez, my special guest for tonight. I thought it was important to have her here for such a momentous occasion." The color drained from Blake's face so quickly, I was genuinely concerned he might faint right there on my imported Italian marble floor. His mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. "Vera," he whispered. "What is she doing here?" "Oh, we'll get to that," I said sweetly. "But first, let me tell you a little story about how we got to this magical evening. 3 weeks ago, I'd been having trouble sleeping. Not unusual for a woman my age. But this particular bout of insomnia was different. It wasn't hormones or stress keeping me awake, it was intuition. That nagging feeling that something was wrong with this picture-perfect romance my daughter had fallen into. So I did what any concerned mother would do. I hired a private investigator. Marcus Chen had come highly recommended by my attorney. Former FBI, current private investigator, and according to his credentials, an expert at uncovering the kinds of secrets people preferred to keep buried. I'd met him at a small cafe downtown, away from my usual haunts where someone might recognize me. "I want you to investigate my daughter's fiancé," I'd told him directly. "Blake Harrison. I need to know everything about him." Marcus had looked at me with the patient expression of a man who'd heard this request many times before. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you sure? Sometimes the information we uncover isn't what people want to hear." "Mr. Chen," I'd replied, "I'm a widow worth $37 million, whose only child is about to marry a man who appeared in her life 6 months ago with no traceable history before that. I want to know everything." And Marcus had delivered. Oh, had he delivered? Blake Harrison wasn't just a gold digger. Blake Harrison was a professional, a con artist who specialized in targeting wealthy women through their daughters, building trust through the children before moving in for the financial kill. His real name was Blake Martinez, and he'd been working with a partner for the past 5 years, running elaborate long-term cons that netted them hundreds of thousands of dollars. That partner was Vera Martinez, his wife. Yes, wife. They'd been married for 7 years, though Vera went by her maiden name professionally. Together they'd targeted at least 4 families that Marcus could confirm, always following the same pattern. Blake would seduce the daughter, Vera would research the family's financial situation, and together they'd plan the perfect approach to separate the family from their money. The beach house demand wasn't random. Vera had done her homework and identified it as my most valuable single asset that could be transferred without triggering major banking scrutiny. But here's where their plan went beautifully wrong. After their last con went sideways, something involving a senator's daughter and a FBI investigation that got too close for comfort, Blake had gotten greedy. Instead of lying low as Vera wanted, he'd pushed forward with targeting my family. And when Vera objected, Blake had double-crossed her, taking off with their entire savings and leaving her to face potential charges alone. Vera was not pleased with her husband's betrayal, not pleased at all, which made my phone call to her 3 days ago one of the most enjoyable conversations I'd had in years. "Ms. Martinez," I'd said when she answered, "I believe we have something in common. We've both been betrayed by Blake Harrison." The conversation with Vera had been a masterpiece of strategic alliance building. I'd approached it like any high-stakes business negotiation, which, in a way, it was. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Vera had said carefully when I first called. Professional to the end, even when her world was crumbling. Blake Martinez, also known as Blake Harrison, also known as your husband who stole $400,000 from your joint accounts and left you holding the bag for a federal investigation into securities fraud. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Vera finally spoke, her voice was different, sharper, more honest. Who is this? Eleanor Whitmore. Mother of the Mark Blake is currently working, and I believe we can help each other. What followed was the kind of conversation you don't expect to have with a complete stranger. Vera told me everything. How she and Blake had met in college. How they'd started with small cons to pay off student loans. How it had gradually escalated into their current sophisticated operation. She also told me about their rules. Never target families with children under 18, never steal more than the family could afford to lose, and always split everything 50-50. Blake had broken all their rules with the senator's family, targeting them despite their teenage daughter and attempting to steal their entire retirement fund. When Vera tried to pull the plug, Blake had cleaned out their accounts and disappeared, leaving her with nothing but a phone number for a lawyer and instructions to figure it out yourself. I've been tracking him for 2 months, she told me. I knew he'd surface eventually. I just didn't expect him to be stupid enough to target another family so quickly. Oh, he's not just targeting another family, I'd said. He's gotten himself engaged to my daughter. The wedding is in 3 weeks. Another long silence. Then to my surprise, Vera had started laughing. That idiot? He thinks he can run a marriage con without backup? Does he have any idea how complicated the legal implications are? How many moving pieces there are? It was then that I realized Vera wasn't just Blake's partner. She was the brains of the operation. Blake was the charming front man in front. But Vera was the strategist who made it all work. Here's what I propose, I'd said. You want your money back and revenge on Blake for betraying you. I want to protect my daughter from a man who plans to steal our family fortune. I think we can accomplish both goals. I'm listening. Be my guest at the wedding. When Blake makes his move, and he will make his move, you'll be there to help me expose him for what he really is. And what do I get out of this? I'd smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Blake stole $400,000 from you. I'll make sure you get every penny back, plus compensation for your trouble. Consider it a consulting fee. How much? $600,000. Cash. Another pause. You're serious. Mrs. Martinez, my daughter's happiness is worth far more than $600,000 to me. And having front row seats to Blake's downfall? That's priceless. That had sealed our unlikely partnership. Over the next 2 weeks, Vera had provided me with detailed information about Blake's methods, his tells, and his likely timeline for making his demands. She'd also helped me understand exactly how he'd been manipulating Sophia. He's good at making them feel like they're protecting him, Vera had explained during one of our planning sessions. He'll seem vulnerable, maybe mention family financial troubles or a business setback. The target feels like they're helping him through a rough patch, not being conned. Sure enough, when I'd paid closer attention to Blake's interactions with Sophia, I'd noticed the pattern. Little comments about cash flow problems with his consulting business. Mentions of his pride preventing him from accepting help. Sophia had started offering to pay for things without him even asking, exactly as Vera had predicted. But Blake's timeline had accelerated after the bachelor party. According to Vera, that usually meant he was getting nervous about something. Maybe the FBI investigation was heating up, or maybe he'd spotted something that made him think I was getting suspicious. Whatever the reason, he'd moved his endgame up from after the honeymoon to the wedding night itself, which was fine with me. I preferred having this confrontation on my turf, surrounded by witnesses, with Vera ready to provide devastating testimony about his true identity. Now, watching Blake's face cycle through shock, fear, and desperate calculation as he stared at his wife across the ballroom, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since the day I'd successfully negotiated the sale of David's company for 30% above asking price. Vera looks wonderful tonight, don't you think? I said conversationally. That emerald dress really brings out her eyes. Of course, you'd know that better than I would, after 7 years of marriage. Blake's head snapped toward me, desperation replacing the predatory confidence he'd worn moments before. Eleanor, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can, I interrupted smoothly. Blake Martinez is quite the storyteller, isn't he? But why don't we let Vera do the talking tonight? I have a feeling her version of events will be much more honest than anything you might come up with. That's when he realized the trap he'd walked into. And that's when I knew the real fun was about to begin. Blake's desperation was almost pitiable. Almost. But I'd learned long ago not to feel sorry for people who made their living destroying other families. "Eleanor, listen to me," he said, grabbing my arm with just enough pressure to be uncomfortable. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Vera is dangerous. She's unstable." I looked down at his hand on my arm with the kind of cold stare that had made grown executives squirm in boardroom meetings. "Remove your hand. Now." He dropped his grip immediately, but his voice took on an urgent, pleading quality. "She's been stalking me, harassing me. The woman is obsessed because I left her for someone better." "Someone better?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean my daughter, who you plan to rob blind?" "That's not—" "I love Sophia. I really do. This isn't about money." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. "Blake, 20 minutes ago you demanded I give you a $2.8 million house or you'd destroy my family with false accusations. Exactly which part of that demonstration of love am I supposed to find touching?" Across the ballroom, I could see Sophia laughing with her bridesmaids, radiant in her $1,000 dress, completely unaware that her new husband was currently trying to extort her mother. My heart ached for the pain she was about to experience, but better a sharp shock now than years of slow financial bleeding. "Look," Blake said, shifting tactics again. "Maybe I came on too strong with the house thing. I was nervous, you know. New family, wanting to provide for Sophia. We can work something out that's reasonable." "Oh, we're definitely going to work something out," I agreed. "In fact, why don't we call Sophia over here? I'm sure she'd love to hear your thoughts on what's reasonable." Panic flashed across his face. "No, not yet. Let me explain the whole situation first. I'm listening." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, leaving it slightly disheveled. For the first time since I'd met him, Blake looked less than completely polished. "Vera and we had a business together. Import, export. Things went bad. She blamed me for some deals that fell through. She's been trying to sabotage my life ever since." "Import, export," I repeated flatly. "How entrepreneurial. What exactly did you import and export?" "Art, collectibles, high-end items for wealthy clients." I had to give him credit. The lie was smoothly delivered and plausible enough that someone who hadn't done their research might believe it. Too bad for Blake that I'd done very thorough research. "And these wealthy clients, they didn't mind that you were importing stolen artwork? Or that your collectibles were actually forgeries created in a warehouse in Newark?" The blood drained from Blake's face so quickly I was genuinely concerned he might collapse right there next to the ice sculpture. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Oh yes," I continued pleasantly. "Marcus Chen is very thorough. The FBI has quite an extensive file on Martinez art acquisitions. Multiple federal charges pending, including wire fraud, money laundering, and trafficking in stolen property. Fascinating reading." "Really?" Blake's charming mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "If you know all that, then you know what Vera is capable of. She's not here to help you, Eleanor. She's here to destroy both of us." "Is she? Or is she here to get back the $400,000 you stole from her when you abandoned her to face federal charges alone?" "She told you about that?" "She told me about everything. Blake, every con you've run together for the past 5 years. Every family you've targeted. Every life you've ruined for profit." I watched him process this information, seeing the moment he realized his situation was far worse than he'd initially understood. This wasn't just about blackmail anymore. This was about his entire criminal enterprise being exposed in front of 200 witnesses. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do I want?" I smiled, and from his expression, it wasn't a particularly pleasant sight. "I want you to stay exactly where you are while I go collect my daughter and her new husband for a little family meeting. Eleanor." "Wait." But I was already walking away, leaving Blake standing alone by the terrace doors with the dawning realization that he'd badly underestimated his mark. As I crossed the ballroom, I caught Vera's eye and gave her a small nod. She excused herself from her conversation and began moving toward the small private room I'd reserved for family photos. It was time for the main event. Sophia was glowing as I approached her group of friends, her face flushed with happiness and champagne. She looked so beautiful, so innocent, that for a moment I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Wouldn't it be kinder to let her live in ignorance a little longer? But then I remembered the files Marcus had shown me. The other families Blake and Vera had destroyed. The senator's daughter, who'd had a nervous breakdown when she learned the truth about her fiancé. The widow in Colorado, who'd lost her entire retirement fund and now worked as a grocery store cashier at age 73. No, Sophia deserved the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "Sweetheart," I said, touching her shoulder gently, "could I borrow you for just a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you and Blake." Sophia's face lit up with curiosity as she followed me toward the small private room adjacent to the main ballroom. "Mom, what's this about? Is everything okay? You look a little pale." "Everything is going to be fine, sweetheart," I assured her, though my heart was breaking for what I was about to put her through. "I just need to clarify a few things about your new husband." Blake had reluctantly joined us, his earlier panic now masked by a forced calmness that probably fooled Sophia, but didn't even come close to deceiving me. He'd had a few minutes to compose himself and was apparently planning to brazen this out. "Mom's been acting a bit strange tonight," he said to Sophia, slipping his arm around her waist in what looked like a protective gesture. "I think the excitement of the wedding might be getting to her." Sophia looked between us with concern. "Mom, what's wrong?" Before I could answer, the door opened and Vera stepped inside. She'd changed her expression from party guest pleasant to something much more serious, and the transformation was remarkable. This was Vera in her professional mode. "Sorry I'm late," she said smoothly. "I was introducing myself to some of the other guests." "Beautiful wedding, Sophia. You look absolutely stunning." Sophia smiled uncertainly. "Thank you. I don't think we've been introduced." "No, we haven't. I'm Vera Martinez. I believe you know my husband." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Sophia's smile faltered as she looked from Vera to Blake, confusion clouding her features. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Blake, what is she talking about?" Blake had gone completely still beside her, but to his credit, he didn't try to run. "Sophia, this woman is disturbed. She's been stalking me, making these crazy claims." "Crazy claims?" Vera's laugh was sharp as a blade. "Blake, honey, do you really want to do this in front of your new wife? Because I have documentation." She reached into her purse and withdrew a thick manila folder. "Marriage certificate, joint tax returns, bank statements showing shared accounts. Should I go on?" Sophia stepped away from Blake as if he'd suddenly caught fire. "You're married." "Not just married," I added gently. "They've been running marriage cons together for 5 years. Blake seduces wealthy women's daughters while Vera researches the family's finances. Tonight was supposed to be the night Blake demanded I sign over my beach house as a wedding gift." "That's insane," Blake protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Eleanor, you can't seriously believe—" "Oh, but I can," I interrupted, pulling out my own folder, "because Marcus Chen provided me with quite a comprehensive report. Would you like me to read the highlights? Or would you prefer to tell Sophia yourself about the senator's daughter? Or perhaps the widow in Colorado whose retirement fund you cleaned out?" Sophia had gone very pale, her hand pressed against her mouth as if she might be sick. "This can't be real. Blake, tell them this isn't real." Blake looked at her with what might have been genuine regret. For a moment, I almost believed he actually cared about her. "Sophia, I can explain everything. It's not what it sounds like." "It's exactly what it sounds like," Vera said flatly. "Blake, you pathetic fool. Did you really think you could run a solo con? Did you think I wouldn't find you?" "You left me hanging," Blake snapped, his composure finally cracking. "The FBI was breathing down our necks and you wanted to cut and run. I wanted to follow our exit strategy, the one we'd planned for exactly this situation. But you got greedy and thought you could steal our entire nest egg and disappear." Sophia made a small, broken sound that cut through me like a knife. "Oh God, oh God, this is really happening." I moved to her side and gently guided her to a chair. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I know this is devastating, but better you know now than after he spent years stealing from our family." "Stealing?" Sophia looked at Blake with dawning horror. "Were you really going to steal from us?" Blake's mask slipped completely then, revealing the cold mercenary underneath. Your mother has $37 million, Sophia. The beach house alone is worth nearly $3 million. She'd never even miss it. The casual admission of his intent hit Sophia like a physical blow. She doubled over slightly, and I feared she might actually vomit. You never loved me, she whispered. This whole time, you were just using me. For the first time since I'd known him, Blake seemed at a loss for words. He looked at Sophia's devastated face, and something flickered across his features. Guilt, maybe, or regret. Sophia, he started, but she held up a hand to stop him. Don't. Just don't. She stood on shaky legs, her wedding dress rustling around her. I need to get out of here. Sweetheart, I began. Not you too, Mom. I can't deal with everyone right now. I just need air. She pushed past Blake and out of the room, leaving the three of us in uncomfortable silence. Through the doorway, I could see her hurrying toward the terrace doors, her bridesmaids rushing to follow her. Well, Vera said after a moment, that went better than expected. Blake shot her a look of pure hatred. You destroyed her life for revenge. I destroyed her life? Vera's voice rose dangerously. You're the one who proposed to that girl with no intention of being faithful to her. You're the one who planned to rob her family blind. And you're the one who taught me how to do it. The admission hung between them like a toxic cloud. I stood there watching these two criminals blame each other for the pain they'd caused my daughter, and felt a cold rage building in my chest. Enough, I said quietly. Both of them turned to look at me, perhaps hearing something in my voice that warned them they'd pushed too far. You're both responsible for this, and now you're both going to help me fix it. The silence in the room was deafening after my pronouncement. Blake and Vera stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to outright alarm. Fix it? Blake repeated slowly. Eleanor, I don't think you understand. What I understand, I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed over decades of running board meetings, is that my daughter just had her heart broken on what should have been the happiest day of her life. What I understand is that you two are responsible for that devastation. And what I understand most clearly is that you're both going to help me minimize the damage to her reputation and emotional well-being. Vera raised an eyebrow with something that might have been respect. And if we refuse? I smiled. And from their reactions, it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then I call the FBI, tonight, right now, and explain exactly how I've uncovered an ongoing criminal enterprise. You can't prove anything, Blake said, but his voice lacked conviction. Can't I? I opened my own folder again. Marcus Chen was quite thorough. Bank records showing unusual patterns of deposits from your previous marks. Email communications between you two discussing target families. Phone records. Security footage from hotels you've stayed in while running cons. I pulled out a photograph showing Blake and Vera entering a hotel together just 2 months before he'd started dating Sophia. This is from the Denver Marriott, taken 3 days after you'd emptied the Colorado Widow's retirement account, the same account that Vera helped you access by providing inside information about the woman's banking habits. Vera's professional mask slipped slightly. That's circumstantial. Perhaps. But combined with testimony from previous victims who are very interested in seeing you both prosecuted, I think it builds quite a compelling case. I could see them both calculating their options, weighing the risks of cooperation against the certainty of federal prison. What exactly are you proposing? Vera asked finally. Damage control. Sophia is going to have to face 200 wedding guests and explain why her marriage is over before the cake is even cut. The gossip will follow her for years unless we manage this carefully. I moved to the window overlooking the terrace, where I could see Sophia sitting on a stone bench surrounded by her bridesmaids, still in shock. Blake, you're going to tell everyone that you've realized you're not ready for marriage. Cold feet, a moment of panic about commitment, something that makes you look immature but not criminal. And Vera? Blake's voice was bitter. Vera is going to be the concerned friend who helped you realize you were making a mistake. She'll corroborate your story about having doubts. Vera laughed harshly. You want me to help protect his reputation after what he did to me? I want you to help protect my daughter's reputation, I corrected. Blake's reputation is irrelevant to me. But if Sophia has to face questions about being married to a con artist, the humiliation will destroy her. I turned back to face them both. In exchange for your cooperation, I'll make sure the FBI investigation focuses on your previous crimes rather than this attempted con. Sophia won't have to testify, and her name stays out of the legal proceedings. And what about my money? Vera demanded. The $400,000 Blake stole from me? I reached into my purse and withdrew a cashier's check I'd prepared earlier that day. $400,000 as promised, plus an additional $200,000 for your cooperation tonight. Vera's eyes widened as she looked at the check. You're serious? Completely. Blake, in exchange for your cooperation, I won't press charges for attempted extortion regarding the beach house. You'll walk away from this with your freedom, which is more than you deserve. Blake was staring at me with something approaching awe. You planned all of this. Every detail. Blake, I've been planning hostile takeovers and complex business negotiations for 30 years. Did you really think I couldn't handle one amateur con artist and his disgruntled partner? Before either of them could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. My event coordinator, Patricia, peeked her head inside. Mrs. Whitmore? I'm sorry to interrupt, but the guests are asking about the cake-cutting ceremony, and some people are wondering about the bride. Tell them we'll make an announcement in 5 minutes, I said. Family emergency that needs to be addressed. Patricia nodded and closed the door, leaving us alone again. 5 minutes, I said to Blake and Vera. That's how long you have to decide whether you want to cooperate with my plan or explain yourselves to federal agents. Blake looked at Vera, then back at me. The calculation in his eyes was almost visible as he weighed prison time against public embarrassment. If I do this, he said slowly, I want guarantees, in writing, that you won't pursue legal action. Done. Vera? She was still staring at the check in her hands. This is really $600,000. It is, and all you have to do is spend 15 minutes playing a role you're undoubtedly qualified for, the concerned friend trying to help someone make the right decision. Vera looked at Blake with undisguised contempt. After 7 years of partnership, this is how it ends? With me helping you save face in front of your latest Mark's family? Vera. Fine, she said, cutting him off. But Blake, after tonight, we're done. Finished. If I ever see you again, I'll turn you in myself. Blake nodded, the defeat clear in his posture. Understood. I felt a moment of satisfaction at their capitulation, but it was quickly overshadowed by concern for Sophia. The hardest part was still ahead, helping my daughter pick up the pieces of her shattered dreams. Excellent. Now let's go face the music. And remember, you're both devastated by Blake's last-minute realization that he's not ready for marriage. This is a tragedy of poor timing, not criminal intent. As we prepared to leave the room and face the wedding guests, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I looked composed, in control, every inch the successful businesswoman who'd learned to navigate crisis with grace. But inside, I was already planning Blake Martinez's complete and total destruction. Because while Sophia might forgive him eventually, her mother never would. The main ballroom felt like a theater as we stepped back into it, all eyes turning toward our small group with the kind of hungry curiosity that accompanies any wedding drama. I could feel the speculation buzzing through the crowd like electricity. Sophia was back inside, standing near the head table with her maid of honor, Rebecca. Even from across the room, I could see that she'd been crying, though she'd managed to repair most of her makeup. Her spine was straight, her chin raised. She was a Whitmore, after all, and we didn't crumble in public. I approached the microphone that had been set up for toasts, Blake and Vera trailing behind me like reluctant actors being dragged onto stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom. I need to share some unexpected news with you all. The silence deepened. 200 faces turned toward me with rapt attention. Blake has something he'd like to say. I stepped aside, gesturing for Blake to take the microphone. He looked pale but determined as he cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate with Sophia and me, he began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Unfortunately, I need to be honest about something. He paused, looking out at the crowd with what appeared to be genuine remorse. I've realized that I'm not ready for marriage. I thought I was, but standing here tonight, I understand that I've made a terrible mistake. A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. Sophia closed her eyes briefly, but her composure held. Sophia deserves so much more than someone who has doubts on their wedding day, Blake continued. She deserves complete certainty, total commitment, and I can't give her that right now. Vera stepped forward then, playing her part perfectly. I've been trying to talk to Blake about this for weeks, she said, her voice carrying just the right note of concerned friendship. As someone who's known him for a long time, I could see he was having second thoughts. I hoped he'd work through them, but she let the sentence hang, allowing the guests to fill in the blanks themselves. I take full responsibility for this situation, Blake said, looking directly at Sophia. This has nothing to do with you, Sophia. You're perfect. I'm the one who's not ready for this level of commitment. It was a masterful performance, I had to admit. Blake managed to sound sincere, regretful, and mature all at once. If I didn't know the truth, I might have felt sorry for him. The murmuring from the crowd grew louder as people processed this information. I could hear fragments of conversation. Cold feet. Better now than later. Poor Sophia. Sophia stepped up to the microphone then, and I felt my heart break a little more at the forced smile on her face. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, she said, her voice remarkably steady. Obviously, this isn't how we planned for the evening to go, but I appreciate your love and support. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of family and friends who'd come to celebrate her marriage. The bar will remain open, and please, enjoy the dinner we've prepared. Just because Blake and I won't be cutting cake together doesn't mean you shouldn't celebrate. After all, you're here, the music is beautiful, and the salmon is exceptional. A few people laughed at that, and I could see some of the tension leaving the room. Sophia had handled it perfectly, with grace and just enough humor to keep people from feeling too uncomfortable. Mom, she said, stepping away from the microphone and taking my arm. Can we talk privately? I nodded, and we made our way toward the terrace doors. Behind us, I could hear Patricia efficiently directing the catering staff to begin serving dinner, despite the change in circumstances. Outside on the terrace, Sophia finally let her composure slip. She leaned against the stone railing and let out a shaky breath. Was any of it real? She asked quietly. Did he care about me at all? Or was it always just about the money? It was the question I'd been dreading, because I wasn't sure I knew the answer. Blake's performance tonight suggested he was capable of genuine emotion, even while perpetrating a criminal con. I think he convinced himself he cared about you, I said carefully. But sweetheart, his actions speak louder than his feelings. He was planning to steal from our family. That's not love. Sophia nodded, tears finally starting to fall. I feel so stupid. How did I not see it? Because he's a professional, honey. He's been doing this for years. You couldn't have known. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the gardens where fairy lights twinkled like stars. The beach house, she said suddenly. You said he demanded you give him the beach house. Yes. That house has been in our family for 4 generations. I know. Her expression hardened then, and for the first time that evening, I saw real anger replace the hurt and confusion. He was going to steal great-grandmother's house. That was the plan. Sophia straightened, and I recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same expression I got when someone tried to take advantage of me in business. What happens to him now? She asked. Blake, I mean. Does he just walk away from this? I considered how much to tell her about my arrangements with Vera and Blake. He'll face consequences for his previous crimes. The FBI is building a case, but not for what he tried to do to us. No, I thought it was more important to protect your privacy than to pursue charges that would put you in the middle of a media circus. Sophia was quiet again, processing this information. When she looked at me again, her expression was thoughtful. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything. How long have you known? The question caught me off guard. Known what? That something was wrong with Blake. When did you first suspect? I thought about it honestly. The night he proposed. Something about the timing felt calculated, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. And when did you know for sure? 3 weeks ago. That's when I hired the private investigator. Sophia smiled then, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all evening. 3 weeks ago. So you've been planning this confrontation for 3 weeks? Yes. And you arranged for his wife to be here tonight? Yes. Her smile widened. You're terrifying, Mom. Do you know that? I laughed, feeling some of the tension finally leaving my shoulders. I prefer thorough. No, definitely terrifying. Remind me never to cross you. We stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the wedding guests through the ballroom windows as they adapted to the unexpected turn of events. What happens now? Sophia asked. I mean, practically speaking. Do I go back in there and pretend everything is fine? You go back in there and show everyone that Eleanor Whitmore's daughter doesn't fall apart over a man who wasn't worthy of her in the first place. Sophia laughed, and this time it sounded almost normal. Is that what we're calling this? An unworthiness problem? Sweetheart, any man who tries to extort your mother on your wedding day has serious unworthiness issues. She was quiet for another moment. Then, I want to know what happens to him. To both of them. I want to know that there are consequences. I looked at my daughter, strong, intelligent, and angry in all the right ways, and made a decision. Then let me tell you about the rest of my plan. The rest of your plan? Sophia's eyebrows rose. Mother, what exactly have you been plotting? I glanced around the terrace to make sure we were truly alone, then moved closer to my daughter. Blake and Vera think they're walking away from this with a slap on the wrist. They're wrong. I'm listening. The cashier's check I gave Vera tonight, it's perfectly legitimate, drawn on one of my accounts. But what she doesn't know is that Marcus Chen has been tracking every financial move Blake has made for the past month. We know exactly where he hid the money he stole from her. Sophia's eyes lit up with understanding. You're using her as bait. Vera thinks she's getting $600,000 for one night's performance. What she's actually doing is accepting payment from a crime victim to participate in exposing an ongoing criminal enterprise. The FBI will view her cooperation tonight as evidence that she's willing to testify against Blake in exchange for immunity. And Blake? I smiled, feeling the satisfaction of a plan coming together. Blake thinks he's escaping legal consequences by agreeing to the cold feet story. What he doesn't realize is that by admitting he wasn't ready for marriage in front of 200 witnesses, he's provided perfect cover for annulling the marriage on grounds of fraud. But we haven't actually gotten married, Sophia pointed out. The ceremony ended before… Actually, you did get married. Father Martinez completed the legal portions before Blake's little crisis of conscience. In the eyes of the law, you're Mrs. Blake Harrison. Sophia's face went pale. Oh God, I'm married to him. Temporarily. The annulment papers are already prepared. Marcus's investigation provides clear evidence that Blake entered into the marriage with fraudulent intent, specifically to gain access to family assets. The marriage will be declared void, as if it never happened. How is that possible? How did you prepare annulment papers before tonight? I gave her a look that I hoped conveyed both maternal love and complete ruthlessness. Sweetheart, I've been preparing for this evening for 3 weeks. Did you think I'd leave anything to chance? Sophia stared at me for a long moment. You knew this would happen. You knew Blake would try to extort you tonight. Vera provided very detailed information about Blake's methods. The timeline was always going to accelerate around the wedding. I just made sure I was ready for it. And if he hadn't taken the bait, if he'd actually gone through with the marriage without trying to steal anything, then I'd have found another way to expose him. But Sophia, men like Blake can't help themselves. The moment they think they have access to significant money, they get greedy. She was quiet for several minutes, processing everything I'd told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. What happens to the money? The $400,000 Blake stole from Vera? That's the beautiful part. Blake hid it in an account in the Cayman Islands, thinking that would make it untraceable. But international financial tracking has come a long way in recent years. Marcus was able to locate the account and provide the information to federal authorities. So Vera gets her money back. Vera gets the $600,000 I gave her tonight, plus the $400,000 the FBI will recover from Blake's hidden accounts. Blake, meanwhile, loses everything. Sophia smiled, and there was something fierce in her expression that reminded me strongly of myself at her age. What about the other families he's hurt? Do they get their money back too? Some of it. The government will seize all of Blake and Vera's assets as proceeds from criminal activity. Restitution will be distributed to verified victims, including the senator's daughter and the widow in Colorado. Especially them. Marcus has been in contact with all the previous victims. They're very eager to see justice done. We stood together in the cool evening air, both of us contemplating the web of consequences that would soon entangle Blake and Vera. Despite everything that had happened, I felt a sense of satisfaction at the thoroughness of the justice that was coming. Mom, Sophia said suddenly, there's something I need to ask you. Of course. When you hired Marcus to investigate Blake, did you hope he'd find something? Or were you hoping to prove that Blake was legitimate? It was a fair question, and one I'd asked myself many times over the past few weeks. Honestly, I was hoping Marcus would find nothing. I wanted to be wrong about Blake for your sake, but I wasn't willing to risk our family's financial security on hope. And if Marcus had found nothing, if Blake had been exactly who he claimed to be, then I'd have apologized to him, welcomed him into the family, and probably felt guilty about my suspicions for years. Sophia nodded slowly. But you'd have done the investigation anyway, without hesitation. Sweetheart, after your father died, I promised myself I'd never again be caught unprepared for threats to our family. Blake might have been charming and attentive, but he was also a stranger with no verifiable history who'd appeared in our lives right after your father's obituary made our wealth public knowledge. The obituary mentioned Dad's company sale. It mentioned that he'd been CEO of Whitmore Technologies. Anyone who bothered to research could have figured out the rest. Sophia was quiet again, and I could see her working through the timeline in her head. Blake contacted me 6 weeks after Dad's obituary ran in the Times. Exactly. And he approached you at that charity gala where the guest list was published online, including brief biographies that mentioned family connections. He researched me before he ever spoke to me. Extensively. Vera provided details about how they selected targets. They looked for recently bereaved families, particularly widows with adult children. Emotional vulnerability combined with significant assets. The full scope of Blake's manipulation was clearly sinking in for Sophia. Her face cycled through hurt, anger, and finally a kind of grim determination. I want to watch, she said suddenly. Watch what? When the FBI arrests him. I want to be there when he realizes that his perfect plan fell apart. I studied my daughter's face, seeing echoes of my own ruthless streak in her expression. Are you sure? It won't be pleasant. Neither was having my heart broken by a professional liar on my wedding day. Yes, I'm sure. I nodded, feeling a surge of pride at her strength. Then you'll be there. Marcus arranged for us to observe when they execute the arrest warrants. When? Tomorrow morning. Blake and Vera think they have time to disappear, but Marcus has been tracking their movements. They won't get far. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Subjects are leaving the venue together. Teams are in position. I showed the message to Sophia, who read it with satisfaction. They're leaving together? Even after everything that happened tonight? Honor among thieves, I said dryly. Or more likely, they're planning one last con before they part ways permanently. Either way, they won't get the chance. We stood together watching the fairy lights twinkle in the garden, both of us contemplating the justice that would be served in the morning. Despite the devastation of the evening, I felt closer to my daughter than I had in years. Mom? Sophia said quietly. Yes, sweetheart? Thank you. For protecting me. For being prepared. For making sure they don't get away with this. I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling the strength in her that would carry her through the difficult days ahead. That's what mothers do, honey. We protect our children from predators, even when those predators are charming enough to fool everyone else. Tomorrow would bring justice. Tonight, it was enough to stand with my daughter and know that the Whitmore family would emerge from this stronger than before. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that made everything feel possible. I sat in my kitchen with my coffee and the morning paper, waiting for Marcus's call. Sophia had spent the night in her childhood bedroom, claiming she needed the comfort of familiar surroundings. She appeared in the doorway at exactly 8 o'clock, dressed in a navy business suit that made her look every inch the competent professional she was. The vulnerability from last night had been replaced by steely determination. "Any word?" she asked, pouring herself coffee from the pot I'd prepared. Marcus said they'd move at 8:30. Blake and Vera are staying at the Marriott downtown, apparently planning to leave the city this morning. They really thought they could just walk away. Criminals often overestimate their own cleverness, I observed. Blake has been successful with his cons because his previous targets were either too embarrassed to report the crimes or too trusting to investigate properly. My phone rang at exactly 8:25. Marcus's voice was calm but satisfied when I answered. "Mrs. Whitmore, we're in position. Are you and Sophia ready?" "We're ready. Meet us at the parking garage across from the Marriott, level 3, northwest corner. You'll have a clear view of the hotel entrance from there." 20 minutes later, Sophia and I stood beside Marcus's surveillance van, watching the hotel entrance through high-powered binoculars. The morning was busy with business travelers and tourists, making it easy for the FBI team to blend into the crowd. "There," Marcus said, pointing toward the hotel's revolving doors. "Blake just came out." I adjusted my binoculars and saw Blake emerge onto the sidewalk, pulling a large suitcase behind him. He looked relaxed, even cheerful, apparently believing he'd successfully escaped any consequences for his actions. "Where's Vera?" Sophia asked. "She'll come out separately," Marcus explained. "They're still trying to maintain the appearance of being strangers, even though we know they spent the night in the same room." Sure enough, 5 minutes later, Vera appeared at the hotel entrance. She looked around carefully before stepping onto the sidewalk, clearly more paranoid than Blake about potential surveillance. "Now," Marcus said into his radio. What happened next was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance. FBI agents emerged from parked cars, stepped out of storefronts, and materialized from what had seemed like random pedestrian traffic. Within seconds, Blake and Vera were surrounded. Through my binoculars, I could see Blake's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally panic as he realized what was happening. He turned toward Vera, his mouth moving rapidly, probably trying to coordinate their stories or blame her for their exposure. Vera, meanwhile, was arguing with the agents, gesturing emphatically and pointing at Blake. Even from our distance, her body language suggested she was trying to distance herself from him. "She's probably claiming she was coerced," Marcus observed. "Standard operating procedure when partnerships fall apart." "Will it work?" Sophia asked. "Not with the evidence we've compiled. Vera was an equal partner in their previous cons. The fact that Blake betrayed her doesn't erase her own criminal history. We watched as both Blake and Vera were handcuffed and placed in separate FBI vehicles. Blake kept turning his head, searching the crowd as if he might spot whoever had exposed him. For a moment, his gaze seemed to land directly on our vantage point, though I knew he couldn't possibly see us through the van's tinted windows. "And that's that," Marcus said with satisfaction. "Blake Martinez and Vera Martinez are officially in federal custody." Sophia lowered her binoculars and turned to me with the expression I couldn't quite read. "How do you feel?" "Relieved," I answered honestly. "Justice doesn't always come this quickly or this completely. We got lucky." "Lucky?" Sophia laughed. "Mom, luck had nothing to do with this. You orchestrated every detail." She was right, of course. But I'd learned long ago not to gloat over victories, even when they were thoroughly deserved. "What happens now?" Sophia asked Marcus. "Now they're processed, formally charged, and eventually they'll face trial. With the evidence we've compiled, plea bargains are likely. Blake's looking at 5 to 10 years, Vera probably 3 to 5 if she cooperates fully. And the money? The FBI will recover what they can from hidden accounts and seized assets. Restitution will go to verified victims, with priority given to families who lost the most." I thought about the widow in Colorado who was working as a grocery store clerk at 73, and the senator's daughter who'd had a nervous breakdown. At least they'd get some measure of justice, even if it couldn't fully repair the damage Blake and Vera had done to their lives. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, pulling out a manila envelope. "The final piece of evidence we recovered last night." He handed me a photograph showing Blake and Vera in what appeared to be an intimate conversation outside a jewelry store. The timestamp showed it was taken the day before Blake had proposed to Sophia. They were planning the engagement ring purchase together, Marcus explained. Vera helped him select a ring that would be impressive enough to convince Sophia he was serious, but inexpensive enough that it wouldn't significantly impact their operating budget. Sophia took the photograph and stared at it for a long moment. "Even the proposal was fake, even that." "I'm sorry," Marcus said gently. "I know this is difficult." "Actually," Sophia said, surprising us both, "it's not. It's liberating. Every time I wondered if some part of his feelings were real, I can look at this and remember that it was all calculated, all of it." She handed the photograph back to Marcus with steady hands. "Thank you. For everything. For protecting us, and for making sure they can't do this to anyone else." As we drove home, Sophia was unusually quiet. I let her process everything in her own time, knowing that the full emotional impact of Blake's betrayal would take time to absorb. "Mom," she said as we pulled into our driveway, "I have a confession to make." "Oh?" "Part of me is impressed. By you, I mean. The way you handled all of this. You outmaneuvered two professional criminals without breaking a sweat. I parked the car and turned to look at her. And the other part? The other part is slightly terrified that my mother is apparently capable of orchestrating elaborate countercons and FBI stings like some kind of white-collar vigilante. I laughed, feeling genuinely amused for the first time in weeks. Sweetheart, I prefer to think of myself as someone who protects her family by any means necessary. That's exactly what terrifies me. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us contemplating the strange turn our lives had taken. What now? Sophia asked. I mean, for me. Do I go back to work on Monday and pretend this weekend never happened? Do I tell people my marriage was annulled because my husband was a criminal? How do I even begin to move forward from this? It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about myself. You tell people that your marriage ended quickly because you realized you weren't compatible, I said. You focus on your career, your friends, your own happiness, and you remember that having good judgment in one area of your life doesn't mean you're naive in all areas. And if people ask questions, let them ask. People who matter will respect your privacy. People who don't matter can speculate all they want. Sophia nodded slowly. And what about you? Do you go back to your normal life and pretend you didn't just take down a criminal enterprise? I considered the question seriously. The past month had awakened something in me that I hadn't felt since David's death, a sense of purpose, of using my skills and resources to accomplish something meaningful. I think, I said carefully, that I might look into doing this kind of work more often. There are a lot of families out there being victimized by people like Blake and Vera. Maybe it's time I put my investigative skills to better use. Sophia stared at me with something between admiration and concern. You're serious? Completely. Marcus mentioned that victim advocacy groups are always looking for people with resources and determination to help expose financial predators. It seems like a good way to honor your father's memory. By becoming some kind of vigilante widow? By using the advantages I have, money, connections, investigative skills, to protect people who don't have those resources. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. In that case, I have one request. Anything. Next time you're planning to take down criminals who are targeting our family, maybe give me a little more advance warning. I'd like to be prepared for the emotional devastation part. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Deal. Though I'm hoping there won't be a next time. With our luck, there's definitely going to be a next time. As we walked toward the house together, I realized Sophia was probably right. But for the first time since David's death, the prospect of facing future challenges didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like an opportunity. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse watching Blake Martinez. He'd reverted to his legal name after his arrest, receive his sentence. 7 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole in 5. Vera had testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence of 3 years, though their partnership was clearly over forever. Sophia had chosen not to attend the sentencing, saying she'd already spent enough emotional energy on Blake and preferred to focus on moving forward. I respected her decision, but I'd needed to see this through to the end. As Blake was led away in handcuffs, he turned and looked directly at me. For a moment, our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw recognition there, and something that might have been respect, though I couldn't be sure. Outside the courthouse, Marcus Chen was waiting for me with a smile and a new case file. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, falling into step beside me as we walked toward my car. I have something that might interest you. Another financial predator? A particularly nasty one. He's targeting elderly widowers through online dating sites, convincing them to invest their retirement savings in fake cryptocurrency ventures. I took the file and glanced through the preliminary information. The pattern was familiar. Careful research into victims' finances, elaborate emotional manipulation, sophisticated technical deception designed to part vulnerable people from their money. How many victims so far? 14 that we can confirm. Total losses approaching $2 million. I thought about those 14 families, probably feeling the same devastation and betrayal that we'd experienced with Blake. The difference was, most of them didn't have the resources to fight back effectively. What's your recommendation? He's getting overconfident, making mistakes. I think we can set up a sting operation using a fictional victim that will expose the entire operation. I smiled, feeling the familiar surge of anticipation that had become my new normal. Set it up. But Marcus, this time I want to be the bait myself. Mrs. Whitmore, that's potentially dangerous. So was confronting Blake and Vera at Sophia's wedding. But it worked out rather well, don't you think? Marcus laughed and shook his head. You're becoming quite the adrenaline junkie, Mrs. Whitmore. I prefer justice enthusiast, I corrected, and call me Eleanor. After 6 successful cases together, I think we can dispense with the formalities. Over the past 6 months, Marcus and I had developed an effective partnership. My resources and business experience combined with his investigative skills and law enforcement connections had proven remarkably successful at exposing financial predators. We'd helped recover nearly $4 million for victims and seen 8 criminals sentenced to significant prison terms. The victim advocacy organization had been thrilled to have someone with my particular skill set volunteer for their cause. Turns out, there weren't many people willing and able to fund elaborate countercons and sting operations designed to protect vulnerable populations. How's Sophia adjusting? Marcus asked as we reached my car. Remarkably well. She's been seeing someone new, a marine biologist who studies coral reef preservation. Very passionate about environmental protection, completely uninterested in my financial portfolio, and thoroughly vetted by yours truly. You ran a background check on your daughter's new boyfriend? Naturally. Though I was much more discreet about it this time. Sophia doesn't need to know that Dr. James Patterson has an exemplary credit rating and has never been married to a professional criminal. Marcus shook his head with amusement. You're incorrigible. I'm thorough. And after the Blake situation, Sophia appreciates my thoroughness, even if she doesn't always want to know the details. We stood beside my car for a moment, both of us looking back at the courthouse where justice had finally been served for Blake's victims. You know, Marcus said thoughtfully, when I first met you 6 months ago, I thought you were just another wealthy woman who was paranoid about her money. And now? Now I think you're a wealthy woman with excellent instincts and a talent for strategic thinking that would be wasted on anyone less deserving than financial criminals. I laughed, genuinely pleased by the compliment. High praise from a former FBI agent. Well-deserved praise from someone who's watched you work. As I drove home, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that awful night at Sophia's wedding. I'd discovered a purpose I hadn't known I was missing, developed skills I hadn't realized I possessed, and found a way to honor David's memory that felt meaningful. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Sophia's name appeared on the display. Hi, sweetheart. Mom, are you busy tonight? James is cooking dinner for us, and we'd love to have you join us. That sounds wonderful. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. And maybe try not to interrogate him about his financial history during appetizers. Sophia, I would never... You asked him about his student loan debt the first time you met him. That was just making conversation. You asked him for his credit score. I was being friendly. Sophia's laughter carried clearly through the phone. Promise me you'll behave tonight. I promise to be the picture of maternal restraint. That's not the same thing as promising to behave. It's the best offer you're going to get. As I ended the call, I realized I was genuinely looking forward to the evening. Sophia seemed happy for the first time since before Blake, and I was cautiously optimistic about James. My background check had revealed him to be exactly what he appeared, a dedicated scientist with a passion for ocean conservation and no hidden agendas. But I'd keep monitoring the situation, of course, because that's what mothers do. We protect our children from predators, and we make sure the good ones are worthy of them. Later that evening, sitting around James's dinner table listening to him enthusiastically explain his research on coral bleaching prevention, I caught Sophia's eye and smiled. She looked content in a way she hadn't during her entire relationship with Blake. Relaxed, genuine, herself. Mom, she said during a lull in conversation, James has something to ask you. I turned to the young man with what I hoped was an encouraging expression, though Sophia's sudden nervousness suggested my smile might have been more intimidating than intended. Mrs. Whitmore, James said, clearly steeling himself for something. I wanted to ask your permission to propose to Sophia. The words hung in the air for a moment while I processed them. My first instinct was to demand to see his financial records, his family history, and references from everyone he'd ever known. My second instinct was to have Marcus run a deeper background check immediately. But looking at Sophia's face, hopeful, happy, and slightly apprehensive about my reaction, I realized what my response should be. "James," I said carefully, "I appreciate you asking my permission. But the only person whose permission you need is Sophia's. She's a grown woman capable of making her own decisions about her life." He looked slightly confused, as if this wasn't the response he'd expected. "However," I continued, and Sophia rolled her eyes, clearly anticipating what was coming, "I do have one condition." "Anything," James said earnestly. "No beach house requests on the wedding night." The reference went completely over James's head, but Sophia burst into laughter. "Mom, you're terrible." "I'm practical," I corrected. "And James, if you make my daughter as happy as she looks right now, you'll have my complete support." As the evening wound down and I prepared to leave, Sophia walked me to my car. "Thank you," she said, "for giving James a chance, and for not running a full FBI background check this time." "Who says I didn't run a background check?" "Oh my God." "Mom, relax. He's clean, exemplary credit, no criminal history, and his references describe him as boringly honest. In my book, boring honesty is exactly what you deserve." Sophia hugged me tightly. "I love you, even when you're completely impossible." "I love you too, sweetheart, and I promise, this time when you get married, I won't bring any surprise guests to the wedding. Just promise me you won't bring any federal agents either." "Now that," I said with a grin, "I can't promise. A mother has to be prepared for anything." As I drove home through the quiet streets, I felt a deep satisfaction with how our story had ended. Blake and Vera were in prison. Their victims had received restitution, and Sophia had found real love with someone worthy of her. But more than that, I'd discovered that Eleanor Whitmore was capable of far more than I'd ever imagined. Protecting my family had awakened strengths I hadn't known I possessed and given me a purpose I hadn't expected to find. Some stories end with happily ever after. Others end with the promise of new adventures. This one ended with both, and honestly, I couldn't wait to see what came next. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Because if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that justice served cold is the most satisfying kind of all. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.